This is the Living Vertizano podcast, brought to you by the Church at Riverstone, a fellowship of the Church of the Nazarene in Madera, California. Our episode today looks at Psalm 126, a song of ascent, containing worship, praise, and expectation. Together, we discuss how noticing, remembering, and sharing what we've seen God do can be a source of joy to the world.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick.
I'm Natasha.
I'm Brittany.
And we are the Living Vertizontal podcast with you this week to continue our conversations on the Advent themes for this season. You'll notice that we did not hear from Derek. He's not able to be with us this time as he's enjoying a drive across the country. But we are looking forward to 2 weeks from now when we'll have him back with us. But let's jump into what we're doing here. As a quick reminder, last week we looked at Psalm 85, and specifically we're talking about the theme of love. And in this psalm, the psalmist held together lament and love. And as a result of this passage, we discussed God's steadfast love and our role in bringing His love to those around us. This week, we continue our Advent series from the Joy of Every Longing Heart, and today's psalm is Psalm 126, which is a song of ascent containing worship and praise and expectation. I believe we have Brittany reading for us. So, Brittany, would you read for us today before we go any further?
Sure. Psalm 126. When the Lord brought back his exiles to Jerusalem, it was like a dream. We were filled with laughter and we sang for joy. And the other nations said, "What amazing things the Lord has done for them." Yes, the Lord has done amazing things for us. What joy. Restore our fortunes, Lord, as streams renew the desert. Those who plant in tears will harvest with shouts of joy. They weep as they go to plant their seed, but they sing as they return with the harvest.
All right. Thank you for reading that for us, Brittany. That was a quick one. Let's jump into a quick conversation before we get to the typical questions. A conversation on context. So, as I said in the opening words, this is a psalm of ascent, and so in trying to place this in a time frame, though it's not like 100% guaranteed this is when it was. Many believe that this psalm would have been written sometime early on after the Persian king Cyrus issued the edict to allow the Israelites to return from Babylon to the Promised Land, giving them resources and the ability to begin to rebuild and reestablish life. And that statement of ascent ascent means, climbing a hill. And so the other piece of this is more than likely it would have been a song that was sung as they were walking up the hills into Jerusalem. So as they're climbing these hills, they're singing this song of praise. And so this is a song of praise because they have recently experienced a restoration of sorts, a return from exile, and this is what they're singing about. And it's, again, probably pretty early on in this process. If you're looking at a biblical timeline, and by that I mean like the places in Scripture, you're probably in the first few chapters of Ezra, maybe not quite to Haggai yet, definitely not to Malachi yet, but kind of in that time frame. So that's kind of where we're at as far as context goes as we look at these 6 verses. And so with that in mind, what are you guys seeing? What are your thoughts? What are your observations as we look into this passage?
So when I look at this, the first 3 verses are really them remembering. In the NLT that I just read, it talks about them bringing the Lord bringing back the exiles to Jerusalem, and it was like a dream. So it's like this euphoria of, wow, look what he's done, but they're remembering it.
Well, and I think as we talk about Advent and as we talk about this week's theme, which is joy, I mean, this is true joy. When we can recount the things that God has done, the miraculous works that we've seen him do, the places of deliverance that we've experienced, those are the sources of true joy in our life. And so I think that this reminder to continually remember, to never forget the story that he's writing in your life and that he's written in the lives of those who have come before you or who are living simultaneously with you, to remember what he's doing and that he is at work. And those are the things that bring us joy.
Yeah, when I think about this word joy, I know that one of the tables this past Sunday, that was one of the questions that was asked, like, what is joy? What does that mean? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And I think that's a important question, but also a difficult question to answer, because even as that was shared with me that was a question that was asked, I was like, man, what would have my response been? I'm not exactly sure, because I feel like joy is more than an emotion, right? It's more than just happiness, though happiness is definitely for sure part of it. I guess a word that I would think of is peace, but peace is also different than joy, right? And so like peace is part of joy. And so I guess as you were just saying what you were saying, Natasha, I was looking at verse 1 again, and I was thinking about this idea of the importance of remembering. And I feel like verse 1 began to expose and maybe help me understand maybe a good like definition of what joy could be. And specifically with this statement of when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, specifically the statement of the entirety of verse 1, we were like those who dreamed. And I got to be honest, that statement wasn't making a lot of sense to me. I'm not sure what's being said there. But if I were to think about like people who have been living in captivity, they are away from home, they desire to be home, but they're not. And so like they have this dream that one day we are going to go home. And then all of a sudden that dream is realized. Like they are going home. I don't know that I could fully fathom the range of emotions and the range of feelings that they would have in this moment. But I suppose if I had to like ascribe a word to what they were experiencing, it would probably be joy. Like in the footnotes of the NIV of my Bible, it says another way to put it, instead of just we're like those who dreamed, it says, or those restored to health. Like when I think about people that I know who have been going through like a sickness, a sustained sickness for a long period of time, and they want to be healed. Like they don't want to have to experience that sickness anymore. So they have this dream of one day I'm not going to have this sickness anymore. And then all of a sudden that day comes. Like the best way to summarize probably what they're experiencing on that day is joy. It's like this meeting of something that you have wanted for so long with the reality of that actually taking place. And you have this like intersection that results in joy. I think of a real life example of this. I guess there's a couple of them that come to mind, but one of them is just with some neighbors of ours that I saw like the transition to joy take place. We have some friends who recently they were dealing with a sickness that I mean, it wasn't like months or years, but it was a couple weeks long, and there wasn't a lot of answers when they were in the midst of it. And I remember There was this one day that I was up on top of the house and I was putting up Christmas decorations, lights specifically, and I saw one of my neighbors walking out in front of their house, and he was moving some seats around or something. He was doing something in the cars, and usually when I see him out front, I greet him immediately, and he's just kind of got this joyous disposition about him. But for some reason on this particular day, I didn't like stop what I was doing to talk to him. And I actually even had the thought go through my mind of, oh, you should say hi. And then this other thought of, no, you shouldn't. I'm going to stay hidden on this roof. Like legitimately, this was the thought that went through my mind. But then I sat there and I was watching him and I was like, man, something just looks off. Like it looks off. And I did not yet know at that time that what was off is that the sickness had resulted in a hospitalization. And I didn't find that out until a couple of days later. And so I was like, oh man, like I can't believe like that I didn't say anything, number one, but number two, like that's what was off probably is just this like existing in this daze of like, what is going on? But then, the good news is hospitalization is over. Everybody's health has been restored. But then like a week after that point, I saw him outside again and everything had changed. Everything had changed. They were still dealing with some of the repercussions of the illness, but they were on the other side of things. And like his smile was restored and he was walking lighter. There was just something different about him, a different disposition. And all I could say is like it looked like joy had been restored, if that makes any sense. And so like I just, as I think about this idea of what the Israelites are singing about and are remembering and recounting, also holding at the same time the idea that, our Advent theme this week is joy. I see that the Israelites are recounting their moment of joy, like, and not wanting to forget that experience that they had, and that moment where the longing of their heart came into reality.
As you were talking about that, I was thinking about like you guys and waiting to adopt London. Like, I feel like that was like, because there were moments where you're like, oh, like, I'm sure it's going to be fine. I'm sure. And then they were like, but what if it's not fine?
Yeah. Just the relief of,
done.
Well, I was thinking about, there's certain moments in our life that I think, well, for Derek and I specifically, that I know without a shadow of a doubt, like you could not convince me otherwise that Jesus did not ordain that. Like thinking about when I lost my job in Modesto and I couldn't find anything in the Central Valley. We were on our way to New York. I'd had an interview at Merced, and it just, it didn't seem like it was going to work out. So it was kind of in the, on the back burner. But the day that they called me with an offer, and it was the exact amount of money that we told God we needed, like there's no doubt in my mind that was God. And when I go through things, that is right now the single thing I think about. When I'm like, man, this is really hard. I just don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. And I think, but God did that. Like if he can do that, if he can, even after people have told me that's unrealistic, that's not going to happen, there's no way that's going to work, and then he did it, then I can make it through whatever I'm going through, because I know when I need him, he's going to come through, because I've seen him do it. And I've seen him do it, not just that time, but many, many other times. But right now in our life, that's the one I think about the most.
Yeah, it's like these moments, these snapshots in our lives where we have seen God show up, reveal the reality of his character that doesn't change, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we're sitting in a moment of uncertainty, we know the character of God because he has revealed it to us in various ways throughout our past, in our relationship with him. And so it's like, in the moment, we are able to hold on to the truth of who he is and the hope of who he is because of who he has been, which gives us joy.
Well, when I think about like those moments, in verse 2, it talks about, and the other nations said, what amazing thing the Lord has done for them. The nations don't know unless somebody told them. My children, they know what happened. We have told them and told them and told them and told them. They know God moved. And that not only, that situation not only restored our faith that God's going to come through. My kids, who weren't really aware of the situation because, they're children and they don't need to worry about that stuff. But they have heard us talk about it and talk about what Jesus has done, what he's done, what he's done before they were even born. And so that, because we're talking about it, because we're, saying, look what God did, my kids are getting that. And the people around, you can't be around my husband for very long and he not tell you some of the things that God has done in our lives.
Right.
And I think that's really a huge point. Like, it's great for us to have that for us and restore our faith, but it's even more important, I think, sometimes to share that with others. And in that, you have to share your struggle too. And I think we talked about that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And when we were talking
conversation.
we were talking about lamenting, and you have to share that lament and that struggle in order for people to share in your joy.
It's funny. I was just thinking about this concept, I guess, today, and kind of having a conversation with Jesus as I'm typing out questions for Bible Club. Because we're doing Matthew for Bible Club, and the lesson I was typing up has to do with the farmer who gives the bags of gold and then goes away and asks them to invest these bags of gold. And when he returns, two of the men have done great things and they've doubled what he gave them. And then the other servant took and hid his one bag because he was so worried that he would lose what he had. And the parable ends with the servant who buried his treasure being cast out. And it's like God has given us this story. And so I'm thinking about this and processing this, and I'm thinking, God has given me these bags of gold in these stories and experiences that I have had in my relationship with him. And it's my job and my responsibility to share these experiences, just like you're talking about, Brittany, with those around me so that I can multiply his kingdom. And if not, then I'm a wicked servant because I'm not being faithful with what he's given me and what he's entrusted to me, which are pieces of his character. And that's a big deal. And it needs to be shared.
Yeah. When you guys were saying this, I think the immediate thought that came through my head is I feel like this is part of the beauty of what we practice as a church. And this, it gets very particular, but I mean, whether it's our midweek encounter group or on a Sunday morning, at both of those times, or even in our kids group on Wednesday night or our teen group on Sunday night, like I guess at all four of those times when we get together, one of the pieces that we talk about, that we share with each other and that we talk to Jesus about is responding to one of Jesus's question in ministry, which is, do you understand what I have done? And in responding to that question, we are regularly practicing the discipline of recognizing how he has been at work in our life over this past week, whether it's a little thing or a big thing, and then telling that. And as we get more comfortable with it, it becomes more natural for us to share that. I know that In my different ministry contexts in the past, this was a big hurdle to try to help people overcome this reluctance to share what happened in their life. I guess we are in a world where we're kind of trained to be pretty private about stuff. And so it doesn't come naturally for us to just be like, oh, and then this happened and this happened and this happened. And even less naturally is to say, well, Jesus did this in that situation, right? And so as a church, like, we believe that this is just a vital part of what we do. This is a vital part of the story that we are to share, right? Of these bags of gold that have been given to us. And so it's important, it's imperative for us to practice it so that way we can be ready to share, so that the same thing that is said about in this psalm about the Israelites would be said about us, that it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. Like, it is our desire that when we come in contact with people around us in our neighborhood, whether it's our neighbors or just friends or people that we know because of school or because of work, it's our desire that those people would look at us and they wouldn't see us, but they would see what God is doing in us and through us and around us. Like, that is our job, our responsibility. And so I think that, Natasha, what you bring up, this thing that Jesus has laid on your heart today as you are working through Matthew is something that we should keep with us. That's important for all of us, whether it's those of us at the church at Riverstone or those who are just tuning in. Like, Jesus has given us a story to tell. Like, Jesus is at work in our life. Jesus is active in our life. We believe that. We know that. We've experienced that. And so as a result of that, we have a story to tell of what he has done. And so in being faithful to telling that story, we are going to get to see exactly what this psalmist is proclaiming in this song of ascent, that we will get to see the nations even recognizing what God is doing. And even as a result of that, right? I just looked down and read the rest of it, right? The Lord has done great things. That's what the nations will say. And we are filled with joy. So it's not just like, joy doesn't just come because we've been delivered. Joy comes because maybe they've been delivered too.
Or they've been given hope too, in the midst of the waiting for the deliverance.
Right. So another thing that was discussed at the table that I was at on Sunday was kind of as a result of the next three verses. So we've essentially been working through 1, 2, and 3 so far. But then as you move on into 4, 5, and 6, you have this like prayer of expectation, of restoration of the fortunes of Israel, right? Of the restoration of the people of Israel and of their possessions of Israel. And this idea was brought up of like, man, it's interesting that they're praying for possession when you get to the New Testament and Jesus really talks about like the opposite of the importance of possession. Like, it's harder it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Like that's kind of a pretty direct statement against like the elevation of possession. And so this question was brought up, but I think it's a fair question. I think it's easy for us to be like, man, they're just praying for a blessing. But as I was reading this and thinking about it and trying to do my best to place myself in like the position of the Israelites, I asked the question, why would I pray this way? Why would I pray for the restoration of our fortunes And then why would I have the expectation, right? So like verse 5 and 6 are verses of expectation. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. Like this will happen. So they're praying for restoration of fortunes, and then there's the expectation that that will actually take place. And I think that the reason they can pray this way is because if we place ourselves in the covenant conversation that they would be living in this time, like they are a people of the covenant, and this is ever before them. And we've talked about this through the both Haggai and Malachi conversations, but also in some of the Psalms that we've been through with Advent. Like the covenant promises for the Israelites to this point were promises of possession. They were promises of land. They were promises of a land flowing with milk and honey. They were promises of positions of authority. Like they were promises that manifested in those ways. And so for Israel to be praying for the restoration of fortunes and then be expecting it, I feel like it's less about the fortunes and more about the recognition or realization that the covenant relationship has been restored.
It's as if the possessions or these fortunes are the physical representation of this abstract covenant relationship being brought back together or rebuilt or remade.
Right.
As they return to Jerusalem and as they kind of get this really do-over, because the exile, the scripture tells us that the exile was the direct result of the breaking of this covenant.
Exactly.
And the relying of their own strength or relying on their own strength. And so they're getting a fresh start. And so
And so it's like they've been delivered from exile, right? And so they have this thing to be praising and worshiping God for. But it's like coming back from exile is more than just coming back from exile. Like we as the Israelites, sorry, I'm still trying to put myself in their position. We as the Israelites are looking at this not as we've just been set free and don't have to worry about the oppression of Persia anymore. We are looking at this as God has given us another chance, like you're saying, Natasha. Like we have another crack at this covenant relationship that he has invited us into. He is no longer like putting his thumb down on us as a result of our disobedience to the covenant, and he is giving us another chance. And so in giving us another chance, these are the expectations that we can live into as we walk in obedience, as we walk in relationship with him. This is what we can expect with our covenant relationship with him.
No, but I was just thinking about, like, you know how you talk about how our kids have such an advantage to doing like what we're doing. It just was making me think, like, with those statements of will harvest, they will return. Like, our kids have the opportunity to, as we continue to tell them about what God is doing and what he's doing, they have an opportunity to not know anything different. Not saying that there won't be hardship, but they see things happen, and then because they're looking for that good, that they're like, oh yeah, God did that because that's good. And if it's good, then God did it. But I was just thinking about how there's opportunity for them to have that. If we continue to have them look for the good, that they will look at things and that's really tough. But you know what? Through that toughness, God's going to do something really cool.
Well, and it's amazing. I was just actually thinking a little bit earlier when we were talking about looking for the good. I was thinking about my conversation with the kids at the table this week. And before in the Advent time when we were sharing where we've seen good things happen before we went into our time of worship, one of the kids shared that this week they had a gift exchange in class and they were exchanging puzzles. And one of the students had the good idea to bring 4 extra puzzles for the kids who didn't bring them to be able to participate. And then it was that child who then called to the attention of the group the reality that, well, and since that was a good idea, that good idea must have been God's good idea. And so God spoke to my friend to tell them to bring more puzzles for everybody, even though I don't know that my friend actually even knows Jesus. And so I just thought that's really cool. Like the kids can get this, and they,
Right.
and as we continue to share and tell these stories and be faithful with the bags of gold we've been given, it really is. It's going to transform the lives of our children. And for me as a parent, I'm just excited to have this opportunity and to have this, like, I guess, knowledge to know to do these things, and then to get to see these practices implemented and actually get to see them begin to work. Because it's very encouraging and exciting.
Yeah, I mean, even though we don't necessarily see the end of it, we can walk in expectation, right?
And maybe, yeah, like you were saying, Brittany, that's how we can say this will.
Yeah.
It will work.
Right.
And I love that I've always thought of the bags of gold as like talent or, that kind of stuff. But to think of it as the things that God has done for us and things that he's brought us through as the bags of gold. And how can you not, like, when I think about what God has done, how can I not tell somebody? Like, how can we
Right.
not, like, can you believe this? But I love that as we continue to share that gold, it's going to multiply because it's going to increase people's faith.
Right.
It's going to increase our faith. It's going to increase our children's faith, the people around us, our coworkers. It's going to increase everybody's faith because they are seeing the good things.
And as we share those stories of what God has done, we're going to just get to see more and more stories of what God is doing. And like, it's just going to increase. It's just going to keep increasing.
And we can say things will produce a harvest.
Right.
Will return with.
And even though sometimes that work in the moment is hard and is sown with tears, we will see a result, a harvest that is a harvest with joy, even through the tears.
And this is our covenant promise, really, through Jesus, that as we obey him, as we follow him, then we get to participate in bringing his kingdom here. And
Now.
so these are the kingdom moments we get to see right here on earth as we're living in obedience to him.
And so I guess, just be out of this conversation, maybe that's where we end with the question of, what are your bags of gold? Like, think back through this last week. Think back through the last couple weeks. You can go back further. I'm sure we can find lots of bags of gold, but I would highly encourage you to keep it a current, keep it a recent thing. But what are the bags of gold that Jesus has given you that you can share with others so that you can see them multiplied? What are your bags of gold?
As we journey through this season of Advent together, we recommend purchasing Joy of Every Longing Heart, an Advent devotional, which is available for purchase on Amazon. Also, be sure to follow the Living Vertizano podcast to stay current on all our new releases. To learn more about the Church at Riverstone, visit us at thechurchatriverstone.org.